Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get yourself a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro. With over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player, man, you're spoiled for choice with something to listen to. So I know what you're going to do as soon as this show is ended. You're going to head over to audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro and pick yourself up something free today.
Warning, this podcast is likely to contain numerous instances of vulgarity and or profanity, which some may deem inappropriate. If you're of an overly sensitive disposition, stop listening now. Additionally, the podcast will be filled with numerous spoilers throughout, so if you haven't had the opportunity to read, watch, or enjoy the story prior to the show, please do so, before continuing with this episode of Sweet Story Bro.
Get ready for action! 3, 2, 1, play!
Hey man, what's going on? It's been a while since I've seen you. Have you lost weight? You're looking pretty good, I must say. But enough of that. Welcome back to Sweet Story Bro, your favorite podcast that lets you know if a story is officially too sweet or just not sweet enough. Yes, sir, it's time once again to buckle in, sit down, say hello to me, your friend, Steve Russell, writer Steve Russell, and just find out, hey, is this story officially too sweet or just not sweet enough? And how do we do that? Well, I'll tell you, man, in case you're new to the show, hello, welcome, thank you for checking out this episode. Here's what I do in order to determine if a story is officially too sweet or not sweet enough. I talk about the things that I like, the pros. I talk about the things I didn't quite like, the cons. I talk about the geeky stuff in between. I look at it as a writer. Everything is through that prism of a writer. Why is the writer making the choices here? Does it work? Does it not work for me? And most importantly, of course, once I look at all of this information, we determine whether the story is officially too sweet or officially just not sweet enough. Now, just a little caveat on that. Officially just not sweet enough does not mean the story is bad. Not by a long shot. I don't work on a rating system of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 100 to 50,000, whatever it happens to be. I don't work like that. I try to break it down into a simple, is it worth your time, is it not worth your time, with the system that I have, too sweet, not sweet enough. But as we've seen with a couple episodes, Duskfall was one, going way back with the old format style. I think it was Tom DeLonge's book, Poet Anderson of Nightmares, where I was so torn. You go back and listen to that when I'm deliberating. So torn. I was on the fence, I guess, all the while with where I was going to land, and then I let my heart decide, and yeah. But there are so many good points to both of those books, both of those stories, should I say, that can't be ignored. I really love finding things that I like with everything. And ultimately, there are things that are going to be present that I'm not a huge fan of or maybe jar the experience a little bit. But what's interesting, of course, is what I notice may differ drastically to what you notice, what you didn't like. I may bring up points that you never thought of, and vice versa. If you get in contact with me at SweetStoryBro on Twitter, by the way, or you can email me at sweetstorybro@icloud.com. I'll get those and, give me your differing opinion. I'm more than welcome to hear it, especially on the structure of the show now, this new format. I really enjoyed, the last time I really had a tete-a-tete, and it's going back a little while, unfortunately, was over the Batman Arkham Knight episode, which was very well received, one of the more popular episodes, and very divisive in where people agreed and disagreed with my points. Cannot stress enough, that's not a bad thing. But thank you for downloading this episode. As I said, thank you if you are new to the episode. And of course, if you've been with me for the long haul, if you've been following for a while, thank you, man. Thank you for checking the show out. Thank you for sticking with the show and giving me your support every time we release a new episode where I talk about these really geeky stories, finding them, video games, comic books, whatever it happens to be, sci-fi, fantasy, and talking about them, giving an opportunity perhaps for you to find a story, a new favorite story that you never would have thought of. That's the best compliment I've had. And I mentioned it in a sweet update, bro, for August, where I was like, man, more and more people have been telling me that they can't listen to the full podcast. They stop maybe partway through, or they get to the end of the episode and they're like, I need to watch that, or I need to read that, or I need to play that. That's an amazing compliment. I couldn't be happier to hear that, because that's what I want. I want to be able to spread these stories, and whether I find them officially too sweet or not sweet enough, Obviously, that can have an impact perhaps on how you perceive it or whether you want to go ahead and read it or not. But if you do want to read it and you do pick it up, man, thank you. That's awesome. That's great. Check it out. That's such a high compliment. Like, I heard this podcast talk about it, and I want to check it out. And I know the authors and the writers are going to be appreciating it too, slinging business their way the way that you do, man. I mean, on that note, if you were interested in picking up a comic book, a graphic novel, a story, or a game that you hear about through here, and you determine, man, yeah, you know what? Yeah, Steve liked it. There's a lot of good elements to it from what I hear. I'm going to give it a go because I'm going to make up my own damn mind. And that's such an important thing. I watched Suicide Squad recently. I won't talk about it right now, but if there's interest in a Suicide Squad review, do let me know. Contact me, tweet me. That's Sweet Story, bro. You know what to do. Come on. I watched Suicide Squad, and, I have my opinion on it. Like I say, I may share it in a review if you guys want it. But I've always been of the opinion, read what you want, but don't let other people's opinion become your opinion. Go out and see it yourself. If you hadn't interested in it at all, when you heard about it, when you watched the trailers or anything, and it piqued your interest, don't let somebody who gave it 1 star or 4 stars or 5 stars sway your opinion on how you feel about it. Don't let a 2-star, 1-star review stop you from seeing it. Go see it and make up your own mind. Don't be a sheep to other people's opinions. Because if you are, you're probably the kind of person that reads a review, goes to the pub, or has dinner with friends, and then espouses that review as though that was your own original thought. I don't think so. I wrote a song about it once in my pop punk band, something like that. Internet Celebrity. That was going to be our big single. Never happened, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it never happened. If you like pop punk music, by the way, Blink-182, things like that, check out Adventure Starts Tomorrow. We're on Spotify. Let me know. But yeah, if you do decide to check out the story, if you want to buy it or anything like that, then you can do so through Amazon. And more importantly, you can do so through my Amazon link on sweetstorybro.com. Not only do you pay the exact same amount, you actually kick back a percentage of that purchase to the podcast, helping me invest into the show so I can get better equipment, hosting space, stuff like that. And more importantly, it gives me the opportunity to make more content. Nothing would make me happier than being able to up the amount of reviews that I give you guys, but with the things I'd have to read, play, watch, things like that, that's a lot of time to dedicate, and of course I have a job in order to put bread on the table and a roof over my head. So if you were to buy your Amazon purchases, any purchases at all, through those links on sweetstorybro.com, it really helps the show, And of course, talking about the show, why ever miss an episode when you can so easily subscribe to the show, either on iTunes or Stitcher, through the Stitcher app itself if you're an Android user. Just recently, my girlfriend's brother's girlfriend, you with me? Girlfriend's brother's girlfriend just recently subscribed through Stitcher. Maybe there's a little peer pressure there. I don't know. I'm not saying either which way. All I know is I have a new subscriber on Stitcher, and it was super easy for her to do. And of course, if you needed the links for anything, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, but most importantly, for those sweet update bros, never miss them, man. Never miss it, because I talk about stuff on there that I don't normally talk about on Twitter. So if you want to get a full scope of what's going on, you got to be signed up, dude. Everything is on sweetstorybro.com. Couldn't be easier. Hit up that link. Do your shopping through Amazon. Follow through YouTube. Everything. sweetstorybro.com. And with all that shameless promotion out of the way, got to be done. You know it's got to be done, man. And I appreciate you being subscribed, being a follower, being whatever it happens to be with any social media, and just being engaged with this, because it helps the show. Everything you do helps me. And all I want to do is to be able to continue doing the show for you, grow the show more with more and more listeners, and share the opinions about these stories. And that's all. It's a simple thing. Simple things in life, man, make me very happy. But we need to get there. The listenership I have is amazing. I love you guys. I love the hashtag Potham Family movement, the dudes at Vault Comics, things like that. But we want to grow all the more. We want this show to get everywhere. We were featured on the New and Noteworthy for so long. We were really high ranked within their charts for a long while when it first debuted. And I really would love for us to get back there, man. Love it. But why Why? Everything, you guys know, everything comes back to why do I choose a specific story? What about this story resonates with me to a point that makes me want to select it over any other for that particular point in time? Well, as a writer or an aspiring writer looking for representation, hint, hint, I'm subscribed and following a lot of people on Twitter, like publishers and things like that. And one of the publishers happened to be a publisher called Angry Robot. And they were advertising one of their books, which looked very, very interesting to me. It features a giant mecha on the front cover and is quite simply called United States of Japan. So everything about it, the name immediately grabbed my attention. And to read the blurb definitely confirmed my initial thoughts about this being an alternate reality sort of twist. Yet again, much in the same way as The Man in the High Castle. Now, do get used to that because that's going to be a comparison and a parallel that's going to be made throughout. It's impossible. If you're dealing with any story where the Nazis win and the Japanese win World War II, you will come across the inevitable Philip K. Dick, Man in the High Castle comparative points. There's no way you can just disassociate those two. And why is that? Why is The Man in the High Castle so prolific within this? Well, did you know that the last episode done in the previous style was on The Man in the High Castle? No? Well, now you do. So go check it out and find out whether I thought that story was officially too sweet or not. But allow me to take a second to read the blurb to you, the synopsis of this book, which I hold in my hands right now, to you, to let you know about what the story is about before I then go on to dissect it for us, talking about the things I really liked and talking about the things I didn't like so much. Here we go. And I quote from the book, no less. Decades ago, Japan won the Second World War. Americans worship their infallible emperor, and nobody believes that Japan's conduct in the war was anything but exemplary. Nobody, that is, except the George Washingtons, a shadowy group of rebels fighting for freedom. Their latest subversive tactic is to distribute an illegal video game that asks players to imagine what the world might be like if the United States had won the war instead. Captain Beniko Ishimura's job is to censor video games, and he is tasked with getting to the bottom of this disturbing new development. But Ishimura is hiding something. He's slowly been discovering that the case of the George Washingtons is more complicated than it seems, and the subversive video game's origins are even more controversial and dangerous than the censors originally suspected. Part detective story, part brutal alternate history, United States of Japan is a stunning science fiction novel in the vein of Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle. End quote. See, they put it right there in the back, man, straight away to try and appeal to the obvious audience that will be ingrained for this kind of book. And I do not say that I'm not denigrating it for that fact, not one bit. It is clever to put this comparative point right there, right front and center. Own it, man. Own it. Own it. And he does. This is written, incidentally, by an author by the name of Peter Tieryas. Although I think he pronounces it differently. It's Tieryas. I think he changed his name because he's an American Korean, which brings an interesting dynamic to this. Although, obviously, let's not forget that Korean culture is obviously going to be very different to Japanese culture. So one of the most interesting things about this is, yes, he is an Asian writing about Asian culture, but it's still a different version of the culture that he's writing about. So it's not like it's something that he knows true to his heart because he grew up Japanese within America. No. Still got to work with the creative license, if you will. So with the story in place and the concept of what happens there, that synopsis read, let's get to the nitty-gritty of what I liked and didn't like, shall we? Let's shall we? Very much so. Okay. So as I mentioned already, there's a lot of parallels between this and The Man in the High Castle. And just like The Man in the High Castle, the story is wonderfully gripping in its simplicity, man. Okay? Yet it also showcases how you can give the same idea to 10 different writers and get 10 very different stories. Because they take the kernel of the idea alternate history, the Allied powers lose, Japan and the Nazis win, right? Nutshell, very easy story. And yet this is so very different than The Man in the High Castle in a lot of areas. There's some similarities, obviously. There's some the things that kind of ring true in both. But ultimately, taking the same concept branches it off into something completely unique, which is great. I mean, I've got many quotes from Peter here. This one's taken from a website that's charmingly called Bookslot. Oh, let me say that again because it's a lot pervier than that. Bookslut. That's right, bookslut.com. You heard me right. Quote, under an authoritarian system, independent of ethnicity or race, how do you handle making such horrible choices? How does that shape and inform your whole value system? I incorporate racial dynamics, but do so in a way to reverse the, quote, normal expectation of the Asian being subjugated by the subjugator. Is that what will challenge readers? Question mark. Again, as the perspective that changes the core dynamic of the similarities between the two. I mean, he goes on to say in another interview, this one with hyphenmagazine.com, quote, and I quote, it's spiritual in the sense that The Man in the High Castle is one of my favorite books, and I was inspired by it, but it isn't a direct continuation. There were so many things about Japan and Asia I felt were not even touched upon in Dick's novel that I wanted to explore. One of the questions that compelled me was, what would it mean to be Asian in an America where Asians ruled? A part that has stuck with me since I wrote it is when two characters in the United States of Japan realized just after the empire wins in 1948 that their child, quote, won't have to grow up feeling inferior for being Asian, end quote. And he does that quite well. He integrates the whole concept of the Asian culture into the time frame that we're talking about wonderfully. One of my favorite things about it is the way that it's set in the 80s. So our past, but their future is present. So he messes with time quite a lot, which I'm a fan of. I like how he does that, actually. And you're dealing with a generation of people at that point who were born within the United States of Japan and don't know it as United States of America. They have no cultural touchstone or concept of it. I mean, only in the sense of looking at the antiquities and the relics of old America and imbuing them with power and ownership, much in the way they did. Don't think I'm not doing this on purpose. Much in the same way as The Man in the High Castle did. This idea of old baseball cards being very, very valuable to Japanese collectors, because that way of life has been extinguished by their winning the war. I was also a big fan, I touched on it just now, of how the story is broken down and how he kind of time hops a little bit. And it's broken down essentially into four major parts, okay? You've got the past, which sets us up with a cultural touch point, where Beniko, who for short going forward is just Ben, as they do in the book, which is an interesting thing in and of itself, having a Japanese name yet utilizing an Americanized nickname for it. Really, I thought that was quite smart in order to do and gets a lot about the character across. But his parents are freed from an internment camp by the Japanese army, where they're informed that they've won the war, and it picks up from there before we flash forward to the present, which is in the 80s. There's the recent past, which is, I think it was like the 60s. And then at the very end, you get an epilogue, which is once more set in the past when Ben is but a boy. The idea of looking, and this is a sort of thematic idea, I believe, that I quite enjoyed, was looking into the past to provide answers in the present. And that's a pretty smart theme, one that ties nicely into the idea that those who are not aware of the mistakes of the past will be what? You got it. Doomed to repeat them. So constantly, not only are we slipping back in time in order to get a context of what happened, we're slipping back in time to see the mistakes that were made and hoping that they won't make them again. Peter has this to say once again from bookslut.com. Oh, you slutty book. I quote, USJ is not so much about the Japanese Empire as it is the contemporary world. Almost every issue finds reflection in current events, and some of Akiko's weird daydreams, subconscious meanderings are references to events happening now. Let me clarify, though, that while I want to bring to light many of the tragedies from World War II, I also want to use that past to inform and explore history's relationship to the present, which is one of the reasons I had it take place in the late 80s rather than the 60s, like High Castle, end quote. Wonderful. That gives perfect context to what I was just talking about here. This idea of not only generations that now exist within the 80s that are not familiar with the way things were before the Japanese won the war, but also this concept of not repeating our past mistakes as a race, humanity. The entire story as a whole, over the course of its length, which is, just double check, because like I said, I have the book in front of me. It's not that long. It's a pretty quick read at 373 pages. It's an easy read. Some parts are sort of, I'm loath to say it, but some parts in the way that they're written is unnecessarily pretentious in how it's presented and could throw a lot of people. It's still an easy read, though, and it's actually quite well written. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time with it very much. I enjoyed reading it. You get through it quite quickly. The characters are, on the whole, quite likable. The action is constantly pushing forward, and it's paced well throughout. The chapters, instead of being like chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, are simply given a timestamp, which I think is a really interesting idea. Like, it's 2:43 a.m. or 4:42 p.m. And the way that Peter utilizes this, very smart, because it gives the story a constant feeling of momentum and development. Like everything that happens going from chapter to chapter, which anyway, it's a book, so there should be that constant momentum and constant agency for the characters. Sometimes that does get lost, but giving the title a timestamp, again, it just gives this concept of like, cool, 15 minutes later this happens, an hour and a half later this happens, and it really does help the pacing because of it. It feels so energetic because of it. And this quote is taken from -magazine.com in regards to how he wrote the book and the pacing and things like that, and how he had to find his stride within it, which we all do. Any writer, any creative person has to. Quote, "The ending was the first part I wrote. The whole book revolves around a decision Ben made early in his life. So then Ben and Akiko become the focus of the story, with Akiko being, for me, the main character, and the truths about each of them being revealed piece by piece. Once I figured that out, the rest of the structure came. I'm simplifying here because this was about 2 to 3 years of hammering, restructuring, ripping out, adding, and finally resolving." End quote. And yeah, that's a great quote. I mean, most people do kind of come up with the ending first and then, reverse engineer the story to a point. It's interesting that he thinks Akiko is the main character. I don't necessarily dispute this. I do think that both Ben and Akiko are, and this sounds like sitting on the fence, I know, they're both kind of main characters, but I would have thought personally that Ben was more the major player, despite how the ending plays out, just because of how much of a crux he is to everything. Akiko stuff happens to her, but ultimately it's because of Ben's involvement that she gets thrown on this roller coaster ride in the first place. So without him, she doesn't have an adventure, so to speak. And it's quite the adventure, man. She gets beat the fuck up. Unfortunately, almost literally, as give me a sec, some horrible stuff happens. Ben, we're talking about the characters here. We're talking about how well they relate and who I honestly consider to be the main character. And that's fine. Peter, he's the author of the book. And his unique take on it is exactly that, his unique take. Obviously, he's close to the material because he fucking wrote it. So some people will be like, his word is gospel. And that's fine. I don't dispute that. But I do think Ben is probably more of a major driving focus as a character in this book. Ben, incidentally, is a compelling character, especially the layers that he has. I mean, one of the major things that's constantly drummed into us as a reader is the fact that he turned on his own parents. He turned them in to the Japanese authorities after listening to them spout anti-Japanese sentiments. And because of that, when he went in to try to join the military and try and join the army in order to support eventually working as a censor for video games within the military, which is a cool idea, everybody knew, everybody's worst kept secret, that he turned in his own parents. And it really introduces a difficult dynamic for him, like on a razor's edge almost, where on the one hand he's completely loyal to the emperor. We cannot doubt him for a second because he gave in his own parents, and yet at the exact same time, man, He gave in his parents. His parents. He turned them in, and thanks to him doing that, they were both killed for being traitors to the emperor. That's pretty heavy. That's a heavy guilt to have to carry on your shoulders, and one that I think that he carried at all times throughout the story. I definitely felt that weight to his character. He tries to be aloof in some places. He tries to be a bit of a joker, but it seems to all come and all stem from a place of innate sadness. The story as a whole, right? So every major component of it, I'm a big fan of this, as you guys know from a previous episode, but there's a lot of anime influence, it seems. I mean, you got robot arms involved, you got mecha battles, dystopian, depending whether on, you're Japanese or American within this universe, of course. You got tech-obsessed alternate future stuff going on here. And you really get the feeling that the writer, Peter, is taking numerous influences and blending them together. And this can work so well. See my Stranger Things review for example of this. That was 2 episodes ago at this point. Check out the Stranger Things review to, just for me to highlight all the more for Stranger Things, how taking influence from so many different places and then blending it into something that is uniquely yours can work so well in creating something new. And I do actually believe that the United States, Japan is proof of that as well. I mean, I mentioned the giant mechas as well that are prevalent throughout this world. Huge behemoths of machines, of technology, Japanese technology, just like you would see in Gundam or Robocross or anything like that, or Macross, sorry. Or Robotech is what I meant to say, which I think was the westernized name of it. Mechas are awesome as a whole. Kaiju battles are great too. I'm a big fan of that. Though in this, if I read this correctly, they apparently don't, walk per se. They've got fleshy sort of outside bits in order to keep the mechanical parts together, but they're described, I think, as having wheels on their feet. So instead of walking, they kind of roll. So, I mean, my initial question became, why build such a humanoid-esque figure if you can't make it walk? It just kind of didn't ring true. Like, if you're going to have huge mechas, they need to be able to walk and do human things in battle. That could have been a misreading on my part. Potentially it was, and I hold my hands up if that was a mistake for me. I'm very sorry, but I got that feeling from it. And again, that kind of mired the way that I was looking at the mechas throughout. Now, the synopsis put front and center another concept I'm a big fan of within this book. The idea of the George Washington terrorist group fighting for American rights and freedoms that have since moved into myth. And this is compelling stuff, man. And here's why. It's actually got a pretty believable ideology, right? These guys want to take back their country from the invading Japanese, who have since, over the many years, decades no less, integrated their own culture and virtually eliminated American culture to the point that things like freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, all this stuff, the Constitution and American rights are a thing of the past, a joke, something that exists on the fringe of a dream from somebody else's dream when they woke up, hazy, barely memorable. And the ideology of wanting to bring that back, to fight for freedom from the government, freedom from the establishment, from the system, to be able to do things as you want to do them, the American way, if you will. The only thing that's missing is a fluttering American flag behind me right now, a bald eagle screeching, and of course, a little patriotic music playing in the background. Although I'm not American, you guys know that. I think it's a great idea. The George Washingtons are a really compelling freedom fighter unit / terrorist organization, depending, of course, where you fall, if you're Japanese or American within this universe. And it reminds me a little bit of Star Wars in the way that it's the Rebels versus the Alliance, right? If you were a member of the Alliance, if you're on the payroll of the Alliance, you're working aboard the Death Star, wherever it happens to be, let's do clerk style, you're like maintenance or a plumber or something like that, and you look at the Rebels and you're being told about them, well, they're going to be painted completely as terrorists, right? And that's what they are. I mean, on the Death Star, when they blow it up, surely, going back to, again, that clerks concept with contractors, I mean, many families would have lost brothers, husbands, grandfathers, whatever it happened to be at that point in time, which is a monstrous act. And yet, the rebels are the good guys. Same thing here with George Washington's. And one thing I really liked about this as well is the fact that they're wrapped cleverly with leaders named after American leaders. So, for example, you got the head honcho George Washington, you got Abraham Lincoln, you got things like that. And I thought this halfway through, and it did happen in the book. I was really happy when I discovered it. There's more than one. So when one falls, another steps up and takes the mantle of George Washington. So in theory, it's a never-ending battle because your opponent never dies. There's simply a George Washington or an Abraham Lincoln, and forever will be. Cut off the head, another will just replace it. That sort of ideology. Now, again, taken from the charming bookslut.com, Peter has this to say, quote, "In USJ, I refer to religion a lot to show how horrible circumstances change the face of religion, making believers much more extremist. They've modified their religion to fit the new paradigm." End quote. And this is crucial because the George Washingtons are not only an extremist collection, they are an extremist collective, they are also religious zealots who truly believe in Christ. Not only that, they believe that there was a further prophet after they lost the war, somebody who also died for their sins. And they've introduced the concept of her, yes, a her, sit down, come on, don't lose your shit, a her into the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I think it's now Father, Daughter, Son, Holy Spirit, something like that. But it's an interesting idea for a new prophet to rise, and they believe that both she and Jesus Christ will return in order to bring a second sort of redemption, a rapture, if you will, to help the Americans take their place back. So religion really does weigh heavily on this, especially the Anglo-Christian side with the Americans and the George Washingtons. And it's explored in a really interesting way, especially how he's twisted the religion, like he says, in order to fit this new paradigm, as he puts it. In fact, he goes on to say, and this is taken from io9.gizmodo.com, no less, quote, "What would the religious face of the surviving Americans be like, forced to acknowledge the emperor as a living god? Having the story take place in the late 1980s would also mean most of the people who lived through the war were dead. To this new generation, imperial rule was a fact of life, giving it a completely different feel as well." End quote. And he definitely does that. He nails that on the head. It's an interesting thematic idea, and one that I would normally imagine is quite difficult to write. This new story that I'm, again, it's just a kernel of an idea, a little acorn right now, not yet the mighty oak that it will hopefully become, is steeped in religion and Christianity and Catholicism and things like that. And I really want to do a lot of research on it so that it rings true. But it's always difficult when you write about religion because A, you want to get things right, B, you don't want to offend people, and C, you don't want to really fall one way or the other in terms of like, is this real, is this not real? You just want to present the story as is. It is, after all, a story. Now, all of the incidents in the guerrilla warfare between the Japanese and the George Washingtons, the GWs, if you will, stem from a decision made in Ben's past, which is alluded to on the back of the book. And this is regarding another official's wife having an affair with a GW. And this affair led to a GW raid, which is framed as an attack that was the impetus that escalated the tension and fighting between the Americans and the Japanese. And I like this. The concept of losing face is highlighted here. This idea of saving face for the shamed military general. Also, the simplicity that exists within using this as a writing technique, women causing war. And that's not a sexist thing. This is just a storytelling concept. Think of Helen of Troy, etc., the face that launched 1,000 ships, if you will. I really like this. I think, and it ties, the way that Peter plays this off ties directly into the Asian culture of saving face, which I'm half Asian, I have to stress, and I love this. I'm just to highlight as well, I'm Filipino Asian, so much in the way that Peter's Korean Asian, I have a concept and understanding of this, okay? Although I did not, where I grew up, I was surrounded by it. It's just within my home life. But the idea of saving face is so prevalent within Asian culture, and it's such an interesting one. I myself adhere to this because I grew up doing it. Again, like I say, I was surrounded by Chinese culture, and it has definitely had an impact on the person I've become growing up where I did. But being able to tie this in so it's not simply a trope of like, oh yeah, two guys fighting over a woman leads to war. It's much more motivated by self-preservation within the arrogance of this guy's decision, and the fact that Ben is a part of this on some small wavelength that has massive repercussions is, I thought, a really great addition to the story and to the narrative. Taken from -magazine.com, Peter says this, and I quote, "One of the big themes I wanted to emphasize was mortality. How, as you get older, you become much more aware of your own limitations. I fear this would be amplified to the umpteenth in an authoritarian society where you can't trust anyone. It's also paying tribute to another of my favorite books, 1984, where Winston is also 39, end quote." The use of this theme is highlighted time and time again, I believe, where they're constantly making fun of Ben for being older. He's one of his class to be older but not given a promotion. In fact, at the beginning of the book, he thinks he's finally getting one only to be snubbed over dinner. And yet, in order to save face, he still needs to attend the dinner with the people that were promoted up and over him. Again, really hammering home these ideals and these concepts early. Love it. I'm also a big fan of how they use video games and integrate them as part of this alternate 80s history, using them as propaganda tools, especially with the George Washingtons and their use of the alternate history sim game simply titled USA. This ties in with Ben's job, censoring games obviously, before the twist at the end about his involvement in distributing illicit games, etc., etc., sneaking code into approved games and so forth. And, I mean, one of the reasons that game's so highly revered in this is because Peter has had an extensive background within his career working for both movies and video games, which is amazing. Lucky him, as well as being a writer. He seems to be quite the, what's the word I'm looking for? Quite the raconteur, you know, being able to do everything. Must be quite a charmed life to be able to do that. But he says this about gaming, and this is once more taken from io9.gizmodo.com, quote, "Gaming is no longer a civilian effort, but a military one, falling under the Department of Propaganda. One of the two main characters, Ben Ishimura, has the role of being a game censor, so I definitely drew on my background in gaming to capture the details of the company and the way the engine works," end quote. So many of the scenes that require him to do something game-related definitely ring true because of his own background in it, helping to root it and level it and ground it accordingly. Now, one of my favorite things about this book is also one of the worst things about it, and it's in the fact that it doesn't hold back on some graphic ideas and images. Akiko, the police officer, the special police officer that's tasked to investigate a murder that eventually links to her and Ben hooking up in order to solve the case together, the mystery. They don't hook up, which is good because there's no love story here, and it's definitely stronger for that. She has her arms eaten away by ants as a torture method, which is sickening, honestly, and written in an immediately impactful way. You read it, and you're just like, holy shit, what the fuck am I reading right now? You know, they throw a character who's I think she's paraplegic. She has no legs. She was in a wheelchair, but connected to a machine in order to play a video game. They throw her, known as Eagle Killer, into the ocean, knowing she has no limbs, so she will drown to her death as people laugh and eat dinner around her. Even Ben's death at the very, very end is a crushing end, with his body getting ragdolled and run over. Like, there's reality to that. Especially just getting run over at the very, very end. You know, his body is limp and dead, and he just happens to get run over. And, you know, it's real. You know, there's not a pulled punch in that. It's not a hero's death. There's no heroism really in everyday death, and that really highlights it. He does something his final act is heroic, but the actual way his body is after is simply not. And this is a quote taken from another website now called artoffuturewarfare.org, who interviewed Peter, and he had this to say on the violence that he utilizes within the book. Quote, "One comment I've seen among some of the reviewers is surprise at the high level of violence. I completely agree with them. The violence in the book is brutally unglamorous and repulsive. I felt to disguise, even censor the torture scenes would betray its very nature, not just for the victims, but for the perpetrators as well." End quote. And he doesn't hold back, and those scenes, although grim to read, are very engaging and gripping as well. They're some of the best things in this book. Is the research has clearly gone into torture techniques utilized in order to try and give an accurate representation of what would be going through a person's mind and body at the time of said torture. Now, as good as the good is within this book, there are a couple of things, obviously, like with any story. If you really review something, if you really think long and hard about any story you've enjoyed, there's bound to be elements of it that you weren't so hot on as well. And these are some of the points that I had, some of the issues I had with United States or Japan. Minor, but there. Occasional moments throughout the story draw you out of the story, and this is thanks to a few writing inconsistencies. Somehow it passed through and accidentally slipped past not only Peter, but also the proofreaders and the agents and people like that. And it's a little bit of a shame. They're minor. I really can't stress how minor it is, but you do a bit of a double read when you see one of these inconsistencies just to make sure you've not gone mad. Wine at one point takes 2 glasses of wine off a tray and then drinks it, and then is described as champagne. A gigantic mech fights and trains next to a prison island no less, and apparently no one sees or questions it. It's a little bit devoid of logic there, especially as they weren't Japanese mechas in the sense of owned by the Japanese army, they're rogue, whatever. George Washington, when Ben finally meets him, is described as not having a leg, yet a few pages later walks away. That doesn't make sense. It's always so frustrating when you're suddenly sucked out of a story because of a glaring lack of logic. And, sometimes that happens here. Again, I cannot stress it's so minor, but it is there. And those are only a couple of the occasions I can recall within my notes. A lot of coincidental circumstance leads to story momentum as well. This I wasn't so hot on because I think it's a little bit too easy. Everything that they do, they get the clues or they get a piece of information or they get the tip-off way too easily to allow them to then continue on their journey. Nothing really is thrown in their way as a major obstacle in cracking the case or getting evidence or something like that. And although they have their run-ins, and those are obstacles in and of themselves, it's not the same way as being flummoxed or stumped on a case for a little bit. Like literally, as soon as they start investigating the murder and then start following that rabbit hole down, if you will, everything really quickly falls into a really easy narrative place, clicking in very nicely. And although it's nice to read and easy to read because of that, I did feel like a couple of true obstacles or slowing down just a little bit because they can't figure something out could have helped rather than hindered. Although this next part I did take a little bit of issue with. Ben, being a censor for the Japanese military, video game military should I say, has an ability to hack anything, literally anything. And he does so using his porticle, which is sort of like a mini computer. So think like a cell phone, but not. And this is way overused. Him hacking everything using his porticle at every opportunity. They're never in any real jeopardy because of that, because he can hack, trick, and plant information in order to get them out of any jam. And this happens a lot. Like a lot. Just Ben being able to swoop in, hack something, and then they're fine. One of the biggest issues I had, though, with this book, was the Deus Ex Machina moments. There are too many of these, and this ties in directly with some of the previous points I've just made. I mean, at one point, Peter makes fun of it himself. The author himself makes fun and highlights in a meta sort of self-referential way. He tries to own it. He does. I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to make a joke out of it by owning it, but it doesn't change what it is. Deus Ex Machina, an undeserved way to get out of a sticky situation you've got yourself into. That you've written yourself into a corner, so how do you help? Oh, the gods do it, or whatever it happens to be. In this case, Peter makes fun of it himself and how Ben wins the USA Death Tournament that he's been put in. Sort of like it's a tournament of games. Like esports has representation here, which is kind of cool. Very neat in that respect and very forward-thinking considering where esports is now, even compared to a couple of years ago when Peter would have been first putting this book together. But him cheating because he knows of a glitch that allows him to run off the map, and because he's under a certain amount of point threshold, he gets use of a mecha that the other player doesn't, and that's what leads to Eagle Killer's death. She claims he cheated. He didn't cheat. He exploited a a part of the system he was aware of, but she wasn't, because she's simply really, really good at the game. And, he gets a mech and she doesn't. And then he wins, even though he's been losing every round. I mean, the quote from the book here is Akiko says to him, "It's all a bit Deus Ex Machina." And he replies, "You got Machina all right. Damn shame about Eagle Killer." End quote. See you next week, folks. Not so hot on that at all. And it does happen a lot, whether the Deus Ex Machina is a literal machina or, using the hacking system or whatever it happens to be, they get themselves out of a lot of jams in honestly, an almost undeserving manner. Now, Akiko, I've mentioned her briefly, and I've talked about Ben a lot, but Akiko. Now, although she's likable, especially by the end, Peter does a great job of really softening her character. I do find her to be very cold and predictable in her nature. The buttoned-up, tight-ass, by-the-book workaholic, which is, I've seen that a whole bunch in anime, like the fresh face just out of university or military school, ready to change the world, and so wants to do everything by the book. And she's so super loyal to the Empire and to the Emperor, of course, that she doesn't question anything. She takes everything at face value, or so it seems. Maybe there are things in her past that affect and inflect upon how she's doing things right now. But hey, man, you'd have to read the book in order to know, because I'm just giving the overview of what I think. The most surprising thing about her is the fact that she maintains a relationship. She has a boyfriend. And given that she's such a workaholic and such a hard ass, I honestly found that to be the most surprising element to her character, which doesn't say too much about her character, I don't think. Like I say, Peter does a great job of making her likable come the end of the story, but the story is 374 pages, man. So, if she doesn't really become she's tough, don't get me wrong. She's a tough cookie, right? But just because you write a female character who can, survive a lot and take a beating and fucking have her arms eaten off, only be replaced with gun arms and an arm cannon, and be okay with that, which incidentally has happened in anime a whole bunch, not calling it a trope, but it's certainly something we've seen before. That doesn't necessarily mean you've got a strong female character. Now, I'm not saying she's weak, but she's physically strong. She has an iron will, but does that make her a good, well-rounded character? For me, not so much, personally. Obviously, other people may differ, and other people may love her, and we know that Peter believes that she's the main character, and hey, it's his story, so of course. But I think there was just something about her that didn't really click for me, and I think it's because of how predictably cold she was. Taken from -magazine.com, Peter has this to say about Akiko, quote, "I didn't really try to think of Akiko as a woman character, only a complicated character I considered the modern samurai." Which is interesting, okay. He goes on to say this with a website called mybookishways.com, quote, "I love her character because she represents the modern samurai, a loyal, smart, tough warrior with a strong sense of duty. At the same time, part of the conflict for her character is the question it poses. Is that sort of devotion a good thing when you're part of an authoritarian government? What I think makes people interesting is that they defy formulas, have parts that are at war with themselves, yet somehow manage to exist while staying true to their beliefs. Since a lot of character interactions in the United States and Japan are masked for fear that their honesty will get them arrested, Akiko is also one of the most candid people, following her convictions and standing by what she feels is right." End quote. And again, he mentions this idea of fear of being arrested for being honest, and that ties into 1984 being a heavy influence on this, just like Man in the High Castle was. This story also has a lot of interpersonal dramas that impact upon the story, making it, honestly, a little convoluted in places. Ben's relationships with multiple high-ranking officials, which, covering up numerous aspects of their personal lives and professional lives, can get a little difficult to follow. If I'm being honest, that's so minor, but it's there. It's definitely something I thought about, at least enough to make a note of it in order to bring it up to you, because, I want to be honest with you. Now, the biggest issue I have with this story, and it's almost ironic considering how much I enjoy the timestamp being the chapter heading, a lot happens to these characters within a relatively short period of time. And like I say, that's highlighted all the more by the timestamp chapter headers. And this can cause issues, I think, with suspending disbelief. Honestly, it reminded me of 24 season 1. Now, bear with me here, because so many people love 24. So many people dig that show. I never got into it. I didn't. I put my hands up right now. I'm sorry if you're yelling right now, if you're frowning, you're going, Steve, what are you doing? Or at the very least, I hope you're like, Steve, give it another chance because it's amazing. I couldn't get past season 1, which means one thing before you start wanting to jump down my throat. I gave the entirety of season 1 a chance. I watched the whole thing, and I love the concept of each episode being 1 hour of time. But what I had difficulty accepting was just how much can happen to a few people within a short period of time. And the point that happened for me was like, this is ridiculous, to the point that it ruined my suspense of disbelief. I think it was Jack Bauer's daughter and wife are kidnapped by some people, terrorists or a gang or whatever it is. They escape, high-speed chase, get into a crash, are kidnapped again, only now the wife has amnesia or something like that. I may be misremembering elements. It's a long time since I've watched season 1 when I gave it a go. But I was just like, come the fuck on, man. That's too much to be happening to one character just to make them interesting. I'm aware now that you're writing a character. I am aware, fully aware of what is happening and why it's happening. And that bothered me and it took me out the story. And I think that this has a little bit of that as well. Too much forward momentum, so well paced, but so much constant forward momentum, not really tapping the brakes at any point, can also bring you out of the story a bit, in my opinion. Taken from artoffuturewarfare.org, Peter has this to say, quote, I think the book really didn't start to get going until I realized at its core, USJ is about two very different characters, Akiko and Ben, finding their humanity despite living in an authoritarian system designed to crush resistance. Akiko's arc became the driving force of the book, and her journey was the one that was most important for me, end quote. And I definitely think that you do get to see that, because when we're not with Ben, with Akiko, they're both got the equal footing. And although both part of the system and both Japanese, although Ben is part Japanese, his father was half Chinese, making him a quarter Chinese. It's just interesting to see how they both look at the empire from different perspectives. One, a slightly more jaded, older generation. The other, younger, not questioning its utilitarian principles at first, until that veneer begins to crack, the mask begins to slip, and Akiko finally becomes a bit more interesting by the end. And that's all to do with her brother. But I'll leave that there, man. So I've talked about the good, I've talked about the bad, I've talked about the geeky. You know, we talked about sci-fi, Philip K. Dick, 1984, alternate history, all this really cool stuff. But the question is always becomes, hey man, ultimately, as a friend, is this worth your time? If we were to sit down and we're having a beer or we're having some dinner together and you're like, hey man, like, I know you were reading this story, you know, you mentioned it on Twitter. Is it worth my time? Is it, you know, is it worth picking up, worth leafing through, worth reading? Fun tale of adventure? Fun tale of alternate history where Nazis win? I would look across the table at you and be like, man, stop putting on that stupid voice. What are you doing? We're in public. Not really, no. I'll be honest, though, as I always am and I always will be with you when it comes to these reviews, unabashed by his influence and admiration of Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, it becomes immediately clear to me that Peter Tieryas only uses this as a jumping off point. As I mentioned earlier, you know, that kernel of an idea, that acorn of an idea that you give the story to 10 different writers, you get 10 different stories. But by owning his influences and inspirations, he's able to, like with Stranger Things, craft something that is, although at the same time similar and familiar, is also unique to his personal voice and style that is, admittedly at times, a little unnecessarily flowery to the point of being, you know, sort of pretentious, but is always delivering hard-hitting action that is motivated and moves the story forward. I've got a couple of quotes here that I wanted to highlight just in terms of his inspiration and how big of an impact The Man in the High Castle had on this, in case you couldn't guess just yet. First one's taken from io9.gizmodo.com, where Peter has this to say, and I quote, When I heard PKD wanted to do a sequel, the idea of attempting a spiritual sequel took root. I wanted to make sure in some form those Asian stories from World War II were told here in the West. But in USJ, I'm not trying to redress the past because it's about more than the Imperial Japanese Army, which is very different from current Japan. It's a look at authoritarianism and the way a military state affects its people across different nations. He goes on to say in a different interview, this one with artoffuturewarfare.org, quote, "The main inspiration for United States of Japan is Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle. PKD wanted to write a sequel, but he found the research material so disturbing, particularly getting into the mind of the Nazis, that he couldn't. I'd long wanted to tell a story exploring the tragedies on the Pacific Front and had been throwing around a bunch of ideas. When I found out PKD wanted to write a sequel, I was gripped by the idea of writing a follow-up." End quote. And that's exactly what he did, as we discussed earlier. Now, taking the ideas, the concepts, and the principles, but lending your own unique voice in the story that you're trying to tell. You know, taking from history and learning from history. The gripping mix of alternate history, sci-fi, and PKD vibes, all mixed with a heady infusion of anime, mechas, movies, and, honestly, a well-represented reverence for video games, create an engaging could-have-been reality that is a lot of fun to be rooted in, despite its minor issues and over-reliance on Deus Ex Machina moments, which, although jarring, and I cannot lie, they are jarring, aren't enough to mar the entire experience of the book. Also, I think I might have mentioned this earlier, there are huge fucking mecha robots in this book. Did I mention that? Is that the thing I said? Did I say that? I think I might have mentioned that. Huge mecha robots. Very cool. And so, as with every episode, the ultimate question gets whittled down to this. Is the story officially too sweet or officially just not sweet enough? United States of Japan, you are officially too sweet. And that's going to do it for this episode, man. Thank you so much for listening to the show, as always, for allowing me into your ears to share my opinion with you on these cool, fun stories. You know, whether they're officially too sweet or officially not sweet enough. Hey, man, if there's something in here from what I've talked about that has piqued your interest, like I said at the top, make up your own damn mind. Watch that movie, watch that TV show, read that book, and let me know what you think. And you can do that on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, email, whatever you want. And of course, if you want to check out the story yourself, why not purchase it via Amazon? The Amazon link's on sweetstorybro.com. You can pick up yourself your very own copy of The United States of Japan by Peter Tieryas. So don't delay, man. If that's something that interests you, hit up sweetstorybro.com. Click on that awesome Amazon link in the corner there, top right corner. What are you doing pretending you don't see it? You know it's there. Click on that, purchase yourself a copy of United States of Japan, and you will kick back a percentage to the show to help me out, man. Doesn't cost you any more, helps me all that much more. And hey, I really appreciate it, man. As I always say, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube, like I said earlier, so you don't miss any sweet updates, bro, regarding things going on, the State of the Podcast address, or the Uncharted retrospective playthroughs, which are still happening. Don't worry. Like I say, because of this restructure, it's pushed back, but it's coming, like the dragons in Game of Thrones. They're coming. It took 7 seasons, 8 seasons to do, 6 seasons, whatever the fuck, for them to finally start flying over, but it's happening. It is happening. And you know what? As a favor, as a friend, you know, we're close. You know, I feel I can tell you this, honestly. If you like this episode, why not leave a tip? You know, a couple bucks maybe. Less than a cup of coffee, or I listen to a podcast, the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith. Less than the price of a beer at a hipster bar, is how he puts it. And it's true. It's true. If you wanted to, you know, kick me back a couple of bucks, less than the price of a beer at a hipster bar, and it helps this show, man. Unbelievably, it helps this show. You know, server costs, new equipment, whatever it happens to be, it helps. And I would appreciate it so much. You get a shout out, man. I'd absolutely be so grateful. I would absolutely shout you out on the show. And it's easy to do because you can do it at paypal.me/sweetstorybro, or simply email a donation to sweetstorybro@icloud.com. All right? Now, be sure to share the show with your story-loving friends, too, all right? Don't keep this a secret. Share the love, spread the conversation, spread the reviews, share them with everybody you meet, whether it's, hey, maybe Peter might see this review himself. If he does, hey, Peter, thank you so much for writing United States of Japan. I enjoyed it a lot. So until next time, hey, come a little closer. Until next time, as always, keep your eyes on the Twitter for the Monday Mention, because you know how we play this now. This show's every 2 weeks. When there's not a show, I put out an update telling you what the next story is going to be about. So you can read it, play it, watch it, whatever it happens to be, before we sit down together and talk about it. Because we're buddies, man, and all I want to do is talk about stories with you. So until next time, like I say, keep it on the Twitter, and please, I implore you, take this time and go enjoy some stories. Till next time, I'm out. If you enjoyed today's show where I reviewed the United States of Japan, hey, guess what? Lean in a little closer. I'm going to tell you a secret. You can get yourself a free audiobook copy of that exact story through audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro. By visiting that website, not only do you get a free audiobook of your choice, and hey, you can choose United States of Japan, 1984, The Man in the High Castle, if you so chose, some of the inspirations of United States of Japan, you also get a 30-day free trial in order to see if it's a service that you'd like to continue. So if you wanted to check out this alternate pseudo-history where the Japanese and Nazis win, why not head over to audibletrial.com/sweetstorybro and get yourself something free today.